Awesome. Well, starting us off is our Executive Director, Grace Rink. So she's going to pull up our presentation here and let you know about the office and what we've been up to.
Thanks, Taylor and Jane and everyone. Thank you so much for having us. And I just want to take a pause real quick to make sure that Taylor, give me a thumbs up. You can hear me just fine. So I can see Taylor. Great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We have a very full presentation for you here today. At first, to me, it feels like I'm going to be talking at you for quite a while, but each of our presentations, we do have a break in between for a question and answer period. And so, if anybody should stop me, it sometimes feels like I'm going too long. So, but we have a lot to talk about, which is a really great thing. So first, I'm going to give you an overview of the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Now, of course, everybody here and many people in our city have known for a long time that climate change is an existential threat. And I'm sorry, there's something on my screen. There we go. I'm sorry. I couldn't see everybody properly. So, and of course, many of you know the latest report from the United Nations has made it clear that the planet has crossed over from climate change to a climate crisis. And the mission of this office is written in Denver's municipal code. And our first charge is to act with urgency to mitigate the causes of climate change and to strengthen the resilience of our communities to the environmental changes already upon us. And I'll also pause to say I'm going to try to speak a little bit slower than I normally do on behalf of our interpreters today. Now, I always say that stakeholder engagement is in CASR is the acronym for our office, in CASR's DNA, because this agency was created in 2020 out of a collaboration spearheaded by active residents, some of whom are here today, and supported by the mayor and some of our members of council. Now, our office works to pass new public policies that will require new and existing buildings to achieve net zero energy by 2040, to ensure that Denver's electrical grid is powered by 100% renewable energy by 2030, and that access to electric vehicle technology is widespread. When we do this work, we're committed to centering our focus on equity. And what that means for us is that any policies we pass and programs that we offer must directly benefit the people and communities most harmed by climate change impacts. People of color and Indigenous people, low-income communities, people living with chronic health conditions, babies, children, and older adults. And now we have now been an agency for a year and a half or coming up on 2 years. And when I first started in March of 2020, I was one of 11 people. And now here we are, we have more than doubled, we're almost tripled in size now, with more new hires pending. And our agency is a real agency. We are divided into divisions, and it's been an exciting place to be. And I want to make sure, Taylor, I'm just going to check with you real quick. I don't know how to make this bar at the top of my screen go away. Are you seeing that? Does that matter?
I'm not seeing a bar.
Oh, you're not? Okay, I see the toolbar at the top. So I just want to make sure I'm not blocking anything. So I'm only sharing this slide just to let you know that you have a big team of very dedicated and smart professionals who are focused in all the areas of the name of our office: climate action, sustainability, and resiliency. And we're so thrilled and honored to be able to do this work for you. So the primary metric that we track is the city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So this pie chart is just a snapshot in time. It shows you that 66% of our emissions are from energy use in buildings and homes, 30% from transportation, and small slices from solid waste and other sources such as wastewater and refrigerants. I find this bar chart to be a little bit more helpful, actually, because it shows you our progress since the baseline in 2005. So a good thing is that we actually did achieve our first goal that was set in Denver's 80 by 50 climate action plan, which was to achieve a reduction of 20% of our emissions over that 2005 baseline by 2020. And that was actually achieved in 2019. We know that 2020's energy uses was atypical, but I'm pleased to report that in just that 1 year, we're actually now at a 28% reduction in emissions over that 2005 baseline. Now, I just mentioned our 80 by 50 climate action plan, which was Denver's first real commitment to emissions reduction. But just this past year, our office, with the mayor's approval, has actually decided to change that goal. Rather than aiming for an 80% reduction in emissions by 2040, we are now committed to achieving a 100% reduction in emissions by 2040. That is a big change for us. It is actually a science-based target, but we are committed to doing everything within the city's power to achieve that. And the question is, how are we going to do that? And, you know, to a certain extent, some of it we know we can do, and some of it are unknowns. So, for example, Xcel Energy has committed that 80% of the power that they will be providing to Denver by 2030 will come from renewable sources. That is a big part of us being able to achieve our goal as well. In November of this last year, we were able to have City Council pass the Energize Denver Building Performance Policy, which will require all of the city's large buildings, 25,000 square feet and larger, to come as close to net zero by 2040 as we can get across the portfolio. Meaning some of those buildings will actually get to net zero, some will come really close to it. So we know we have that in our corner. Things that we don't know yet are what are shown here in italics. So we are working on getting net zero into the building code so that new construction buildings and homes will be required to meet that goal. We are working on waste diversion policies, which we're going to present about later in the presentation. Things we really don't know, what happens at the federal level. So transportation in general is really, the emissions there are very much regulated at the federal level. And so we need to have more advocacy there to make sure that all of the nation's fleet is required to continually increase its efficiency. That will really help us here in Denver. And then of course, federal and state air quality regulations. That is an area that as a city and county, we don't regulate emitters of certain pollutants, especially ones that are obviously outside of our jurisdiction. We rely on the federal and state level for that. So now if I can tap Naomi. Naomi, I'm going to keep the presentation going for you, but
Okay.
if you could come up on screen and you tell me when you're ready to switch slides. I'm going to turn this over to Naomi Amaha. She is one of the members of the Sustainability Advisory Council, and she's going to take a few minutes to tell you about that body. Naomi, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Grace. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm going to briefly touch on the structure and the charge of the Sustainability Advisory Council. So Grace, feel free to go ahead. All right. So you see before you 6 committees that make up the full body of the council. And truly our charge as a council is to advise and elevate recommendations to Grace and her team on how they might advance the city's climate goals and use the funding that was collected through Measure 2A. So a lot of our work as well is really focused on engaging the different constituencies and community members that each of the committee members touch to share the work of the Climate Office, but also get their feedback as we are looking at different recommendations. So I'll touch on briefly each of the 6 committees' charges. Science and research, they're really our great resource as we think about how we're using the best science and research when we're thinking about different recommendations that we're elevating to the Climate Office. And they, I believe, were very involved with city staff and updating the city's goals around climate emissions. The Community Adaptation, Resilience and Environmental Justice Committee, often called CAREJ. They're a committee that are really looking at what are those strategies, programs that can really help in addressing the needs of those communities that are most impacted by climate change. They're often a resource as well for the other committees as we're thinking about different ideas that we want to elevate to the full SAC. The Energy Committee is really focused on advising on strategies on how to decarbonize Denver's energy system. So as Grace mentioned before, they were very involved in the Energize Denver plan. The committee that I co-chair is really looking at what are those programmatic supports, what are the policy recommendations that will help in reducing emissions due to transportation. And so we work really closely with not only our liaison in the Climate Office, but the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to help inform our ideas and decision-making as we think about different recommendations on transportation. The Resource Management Committee advises the Climate Office on programs that will support improving air and water quality, as well as green space and promoting sustainable land use and reducing solid waste. So they've been very involved in the efforts that Grace and her team will touch on later as we think about recycling and composting. And then lastly, building and homes, they're really working on strategies related to reducing emissions within buildings and homes and improving air quality. We're really fortunate with each of our committees. We have a staff liaison who works in partnership with us as we're thinking about those different ideas and approaches that we want to elevate to the full council. Next slide, Grace. So just thinking about the mechanics of the structure, each committee has a co-chair. So that means there's 12 total co-chairs, as well as 2 at-large committee members, and then council member Paul Cashman serves as our city council liaison. And when I'm done talking, I'll drop some links in the chat if you all are curious on who are the different members of those respective committees. Next slide, Grace. And then we've been really great in terms of just the work that we're doing. So before you see some of the recommendations that various committee members elevated to the full council, and the full council reached consensus on. So when we do that, ultimately that is a formal recommendation that goes to Grace and her team, and they work to determine, okay, is this something that we can implement? What are the things that we need? And they report back to our council. So we've got a lot of, I think, great ideas that will be elevated throughout 2022. So more to come, but we've got some really great starting points around recommendations that we've made to the Climate Office. So I think next is Q&A. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Naomi. Yes, we have arrived at one of the Q&A portions of the presentation. So we will pause. And then I don't know if Taylor or Jane, if you want to take questions. I can't really see everybody. Right now I can just see Naomi because I have the screen up.
I can't see hands, and I'm not seeing anything new in the chat yet. But what I would like to say is, if you're attending today and you're not a regular at some of our meetings, please leave your email in the chat so we can add you to our list that we'll be contacting for our meetings. So if you're not a regular attendee, that would really help us a lot. So, and thanks for all this great information. Any questions?
Adrian Brown and Miles have their hands up, and there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I can see the chat now.
Yes, thank you so much for presenting. This is Adrian Brown. I wanted to highlight something that you said in the introduction, which was that we are currently at 7.66 million tons of emissions in the city and county of Denver. And I don't think that that's necessarily something that really grabs people. Let me put it to the, whatever it is, 68 people who are listening here. Each of you of the part of the 705,000 people in the city and county of Denver, and each of you are therefore responsible right now for 10.9 tons of emissions, each of you. Think about it. Every year, over 10 tons, that's 5 cars worth of weight of emissions. And I would strongly suggest that everybody on this call, and frankly, everybody in Denver, give some thought to that. This is not something that the city and county of Denver is going to solve. It's not something that the feds are going to solve. It's something that we are going to solve if we're going to solve it. And you've got to get rid of 10 tons of your emissions every year. It's a really, really heavy lift, but it can be done.
Miles, are you next?
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering how you're accounting for the proposed population growth. We've got some items or some rezoning that the planning department wants to move forward. And one of them is going to be allowing multifamily development on all single family zoning. The planning department basically has said at the moment they're not going to move forward with that, but it is embedded in Blueprint Denver that it will be required that will happen. So I guess my question is, the planning department has a lot of proposed population growth. within, I think, their goals for the city. So how does that construction and increased population affect these numbers? And just more as a side note, when I was on the ECAP steering committee, I was basically told by the planning department that it doesn't really make sense for me to have my house adjacent to Colfax, that it should basically be all apartment buildings. So with the planning department making those types of changes or direction, again, we're talking about redevelopment and changes to large sections of the city. With the planning department would like redevelopment, basically. So how does that fit into your numbers?
So what I would say to that is we're working on policies, big policies that will change how new construction is done in Denver. So right now, the planning department is going through its routine every 3-year building code update, and we are at the table with them trying to get net zero requirements into the building code. So our goal is actually that by 2030, all new construction buildings and homes will be required to achieve net zero energy. Now, so that's a way of addressing the population issue you're talking about, because we can't regulate how individuals behave, but as a city, we certainly can regulate how buildings are constructed. So if we can get all of our new construction buildings net zero, and then through the Energize Denver policy, again, we are already committed to having our existing building stock get to net zero by 2040. That still does leave all of our existing residential single family homes and smaller apartment buildings and smaller commercial buildings as well. But we're at least tackling these big, large sectors first now. And ideally that will get us to as close to net zero as we can get.
So just a quick follow-up. So how do you account for the emissions basically from the demolition as well as building of new units? Because again, if we're moving into this phase of houses are being torn down and being rebuilt, that just by matter of fact,
I thought it wasn't working,
is
period.
increasing emissions.
Yeah, I hear
Hi,
you.
hold on. Whoever has their Zoom not muted or their phone not muted, could you please go ahead and mute it so that unless you're speaking, please have it muted, okay? Thank you very much.
Sure. I think what you're really asking about there is embodied carbon. And we do not yet have a true scientific assessment of the embodied carbon in both the demolition process and also in new construction. That is on our radar, and it is something that we're considering doing, whether it's this year or by the end of next year. So we don't actually have an assessment of embodied carbon yet.
Okay, because I just think more looking at it holistically, that is a big factor as well. You take down a house that's 100 years old, and the materials involved and the type of how it's being thrown away or being reused even possibly would have a big impact on that.
Okay, I'm going to call an end to this particular Q&A. We're trying to get it to 5 minutes at each time. There will be others later, and there'll be a whole big long Q&A at the end so that they can keep up with their program.
Sure. And Jane,
Okay.
also we can commit that our office will answer all of the questions in the chat. We can take those on in the next week, and we can provide you with a full Q&A that you can distribute to everyone who is here and put on your website.
Thank you.
So everybody, please continue populating the chat with your questions. Okay, so I'll move on to the next section, which is about the Climate Protection Fund, which Naomi alluded to in her presentation. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, it was ballot initiative 2A from the November 3rd, 2020 ballot. And that was a recommendation by our Climate Action Task Force to put a ballot initiative out for Denver voters to approve a 0.25% sales tax that would generate about $40 million a year for our office to put towards climate action programs and projects. And I think what I'm showing you here is just hopefully in the next year, as we get real physical projects out there into communities, you will begin to see this branding actually put on plaques on e-bikes and on other things around town so that you and the other residents of Denver can see where your taxpayer dollars are going. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is shorter than the last one. I'm going to walk through each of the allowable uses and tell you the basics of what they cover and the investments that we made in 2021. And then I will end with a 2022 look ahead to tell you what we know at this time is coming in this in the current year. So the first allowable use is workforce development. And on each of these slides, what you see here in italics, this is what the ballot language actually says. That's what we call the allowable use. So this is what we're allowed to spend the money on. And then I won't read every word on the slide, but again, on each slide, you'll see what we invested in 2021. So our big accomplishment in workforce development was funding 6 community-based groups and local institutions to provide a variety of workforce training programs, from exposing high school students to green careers to actual on-the-job work for people in industries that are transitioning and people who have just not been able to enter the green labor force here in Denver. We also have language in all of our RFPs, and again, I'll use that term throughout, that's request for proposal. So in order for us to get money out into the community, we have to issue a request for proposal that community organizations and companies can bid on to do the work of this office. So we have language in those RFPs that encourage the bidders to have strong labor standards and worker protections within their own companies and within their teams. Now, we're limited by state and local laws, but we are trying it out. And we're going to analyze the impact of these benefits in our evaluation process. Renewables had a big year this year, in 2021, right at the end of 2021, we finalized a contract to build 10 community solar arrays on public property. The total portfolio will provide about 30% of its energy output to affordable housing and low-income residents. We are funding some behind the meter solar on city buildings and subsidizing rooftop solar for low and moderate income homeowners. And right now we have a request for proposal open for human service providers, essentially nonprofit organizations, think like homeless shelters and food pantries and daycares, to install solar, to electrify their buildings, and to add electric vehicle charging for their buildings. Now, climate and environmental justice, if you can see here, it doesn't say too much. It's a pretty broad and wide open category. This one and the next one, which is adaptation and resiliency, we didn't have any direct investments in these in 2021. And while we know that we need to move fast in these categories, we also need to be deliberate and purposeful about co-creating the strategies with the communities. So in 2021, we drafted a plan for an environmental justice support fund, which would train residents and community organizations on how to advocate for themselves to the state agencies that regulate polluting entities like Suncor. And our colleague, Jorge Figueroa, who I don't think was able to join us today, he's our community partners administrator, and he's the staff liaison to the CARE-J committee that Naomi mentioned. He's embarking on a series of rapid assessments in Denver's Nest neighborhoods to work with community organizations to identify their needs and hopes for climate action in their communities. And we know that that process will lead to a lot of funding opportunities in this allowable use. And so similar to the last explanation I gave about environmental justice, the investments in adaptation and resiliency also need to be identified and developed in partnership with residents, because you see here that it's not just any adaptation and resiliency. The allowable use is specific to helping vulnerable communities prepare for a changing climate. So in 2021, we identified the need for a Promotora style outreach program. That's been a big recommendation of the CARE-J committee. And we hope to have that RFP out in the next few weeks. Okay. Sustainable transportation. So our colleague, Mike Salisbury, some of you may know him, and his team were and Sam Dunmeyer, Sam is here. Hi, Sam. I don't know if he wants to show his face, but he is also on the team working on these projects. So they got a number of programs funded this year, and we're excited to see how they're going to scale up. You know, something to understand about transportation, which I'm sure you all know because you're active community members, transportation infrastructure is expensive. And with $40 million spread over 6 allowable uses, it doesn't leave a lot of money to do really big transportation infrastructure. But what Mike and his team have focused on are small hyperlocal projects that they think can scale up over time and have a really big impact. So in each case of the projects listed here, the goal is to reduce the reliance on personal vehicles and provide people without vehicles greater access to jobs and services through net zero transportation or net zero emission transportation. The Montbello connector is one that you may have heard about. It's proven to be very popular, and Naomi's committee has recommended that the city do everything that it can to expand that opportunity to other neighborhoods. So those are some of the innovations that are happening in transportation. And finally, we have buildings and homes. So while shepherding the Energized Denver building performance policy through City Council, our buildings team also managed to get 2 program offerings out to the public. So the first building to disconnect from the steam loop system, thanks to the CPF, is a shelter owned by the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And that incentive program is open all year. It doesn't close. And so we're really hoping that other buildings on that steam loop system will be inspired by what Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is doing and also see this as a viable option for their buildings as well. Now, you may or may not know, but the ordinance that created the Climate Protection Fund has this goal that the funding should, over the long term, endeavor to invest at least 50% in projects that are for the direct benefit of the people in our community who are most harmed by climate change. And we understand that that 50% is a floor, it's not a ceiling. That is where we are supposed to start. So at least in this first year, I can tell you that we completed contracts for about $7.5 million worth of work. A little over 5 million of that meets this equity requirement. So at least in the first year, not counting that this big solar contract that happened right at the end of the year. So our equity investment achieved at 70%, and we're pleased with that. This is something that we're monitoring contract by contract to make sure that we're actually directing the funds the way the voters intended them to be. And now briefly, I'll take you into 2022. So we have, again, like I mentioned, we are not allowed to give grants. We can't take unsolicited proposals and just give people money. We actually are required, by city ordinance, we have to release requests for proposals. We have to receive them back and review and evaluate them objectively and have a competitive bidding process. So we have been working night and day to get as many of these out to the community as quickly as possible. So one of the first that we'll be hearing about soon, we are hiring an administrator to create climate action rebates for businesses and homeowners to actually do projects like solar and electrification and EV charging at home and at their businesses. So we're really excited about that one. That should be a great conduit to getting a lot of money out into the community. And then same with the healthy, affordable home electrification. That is focusing funding specifically for low income housing and affordable housing to electrify their end uses. So those are closed, and we're making the contracts and selections now. Ones that are still open, like I mentioned, the steam to electric conversion, that's open all year. Same thing with the incentive program for human service providers. That we take applications for that one quarterly. And I'm going to look at Taylor or others on our team who can drop those links on our website into the chat so people can find those and share them. We also have an application for schools, mostly public schools, to actually build solar outdoor classrooms, which is something that we know after this pandemic, a lot of schools would like to have shaded outdoor space where they can actually hold classes. And so that's an opportunity for them as well. And the Community Tree Initiative is something we're really excited about. It's our first foray into natural resources work. And so that's an opportunity available to community organizations as well. In the pipeline, we have incentives specifically aimed at the buildings that are required to comply with that Energized Denver building performance policy. I mentioned the Promotora program and also the Environmental Justice Support Fund. We hope to have those out in the next couple of months. And now I will pause and we can take more Q&A about the CPF.
Great, thanks, Grace. There are some questions, there are a lot of questions in the chat, but we'll try to pick out a couple that were relevant, I think, to what we were just discussing.
Okay.
This is from Carol Hunter, to encourage biking, walking, and rolling through our communities. Drivers must slow down. Are you addressing bike lane issues and safer streets in any of this?
That's a really good question. So not with the Climate Protection Fund, but we are partners with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DOTI. They're the ones who actually create bike lanes, create protected bike lanes, do complete streets work. So we work hand in hand with them and on their transportation demand solutions, but that is the agency that actually does the work that you're talking about.
Great. There's another question here from David. With all the oil and gas companies headquartered in Denver, is there a bridge to renewable energy for them and their employees?
A bridge to renewable. I
think this kind of talks about is there some equity issues for, kind of displaced oil and gas workers?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
As we're transitioning to this new economy.
Sure. Well, I think that is a goal within our workforce development category, is that we know that there are industries in transition. And so we want to make sure that the people in those industries have a pipeline, if you will, into the new sectors of work where they might be able to find, beneficial work that still meets their same income requirements that they had in oil and gas. I think one catch is that a lot of those workers are not necessarily in Denver at this time. And so if you think about where the oil and gas extraction and refining happens, that's not in the city and county of Denver. But certainly if those workers are looking to transition to jobs here in Denver that we can support through workforce training, then absolutely those programs are open to them.
Great. And that's great. And this is another, I think, great question to kind of address. What is CASR's interface with adjacent agencies like Arapahoe County in all of this?
Oh, I don't know about Arapahoe specifically. I can tell you that, one good example is our Department of Public Health and Environment is where the Environmental Quality Division is headquartered. And those are the folks that actually do the air quality monitoring for the city. And they're also the ones who represent the city in proceedings before the Air Quality Control Commission and other state agencies that manage and monitor air quality issues and the ones who actually regulate the polluters. Now, they have been very effective at coordinating and collaborating with their counterparts in other counties around us. I haven't heard Arapahoe specifically, but certainly Tri-County Health, which I don't know that that's Tri-County anymore, Adams County, City of Commerce City, City of Adams City, they have collaborated very, very closely together on those air quality issues. So at least I can speak to it that way. I can ask them and report back about Arapahoe specifically.
Great, thank you. And there's been a couple of questions on here that I would just kind of summarize as what's CASR's relationship with the tree canopy in Denver, and is that under CASR? Is that a different agency? And how is tree canopy in Denver being addressed?
Sure. Well, and actually that's where the community tree initiative comes from. So no, we do not have any regulatory role in terms of managing or enhancing tree canopy. So the tree canopy in Denver is monitored and tracked by the Department of Parks and Rec. That's where the forestry division is. But what forestry really looks at is, or what they manage, are trees on public property. So whether that's parks or other city-owned property and tree lawns, right, the right-of-way, that's where they can actually increase tree canopy themselves. The niche that we have is that we can actually support tree planting on private property. And that's what that new community tree initiative is all about. So what we understand from forestry is that 80% of the plantable space in Denver is on private property. And so we are able to use funding from the Climate Protection Fund to support tree planting on that property, which our Parks Department is not permitted to do. So I would say we're working in collaboration with those who have all the data about the tree canopy in Denver.
Great. And I think this has come up a couple of times, but are you able to provide a list or some resources on the current equity projects that CASR is working on?
A list. Yes, I can't look at Taylor. I'm kind of looking at Taylor. We have an equity section of our website, and I know that our website is undergoing some updates and changes right now. So if we don't have everything listed there, we certainly can in the next couple of months get a more comprehensive list up there.
Great. Well, why don't we let you move on to your next section, and we'll follow up with some more.
All right. And I think this is still me, but I promise I think 1 or 2 presentations after this are not me. So you won't have to see my face and hear my voice too much longer. Now I'm going to give you a presentation about what other agencies are doing that is related to climate. And all of this was presented in our budget hearing this past fall. So nearly half of the city's combined climate focus investments are made in making our buildings more energy efficient and investing in renewables. So I guess I don't want to bore you too much with which agency does what. So DEN is the airport, CCD, when you see that, that's City and County of Denver. And then NWC is the National Western Campus. So we have 6 new facilities in different stages of construction that are all on track to achieve LEED Gold, which is the city's requirement for its own buildings. And I think I kind of mentioned earlier, the Climate Protection Fund is making big investments in community solar citywide. Our city agencies will be subscribers to these community solar arrays. And we've got the strong workforce developments in there as well. So, and of course, the airport is like a city unto itself, and it has an enormous amount of buildings, and they're doing a lot in terms of making them more energy efficient and trying to bring in solar wherever possible. What really, really interesting project is this, if you haven't heard of it, the the National Western Center has a district energy system. So it's actually extracting waste heat from the sewer pipes that run underneath the facility. And that is helping to bring its energy demand really, really close to net zero. It's not quite 100%, but it's closer than any large facility in the city. And we're excited to see that project progress. So our next big investment is in natural resources, speaking of trees, and specifically in expanding our green infrastructure footprint and water quality and conservation. So a good example is Heron Pond. I don't know if anyone knows about that project. It's about an 80-acre regional park in Globeville, and it combined the existing Heller and Heron Pond open spaces with a 20-acre parcel from our wastewater group that will treat stormwater in a series of wetland treatment ponds that are really disguised as a beautiful natural open space. Transportation and mobility, that's obvious. It's a huge priority for the city. And again, Dottie is the department that manages that. They're constantly working to improve infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists, and pursuing innovative and hyperlocal solutions like the Montbello the Montbello connector that we mentioned earlier, to enable our residents to be less solo car dependent or less car dependent in general. So we're continuing to expand our electric vehicle charging station network across the city. And we have an interdepartmental working group that is preparing for what we hope will be a large influx of federal dollars that, gosh, aren't we all waiting for those to arrive any day now, right? That will really help expand access to electric vehicle charging. And in our part will be to actually get electric vehicles, car share vehicles, into communities that don't have access to those vehicles. And that really just, it compounds in a good way all the dollars that we can bring to this effort. Solid waste management, and we're going to hear more about this later, but they are working hard to provide excellent service to customers, and that includes providing our compost service and managing the Cherry Creek composting facility. The National Western Center, in all that construction that they're doing, they are actually paying to divert their construction waste from landfill, which is not yet a city requirement. And I don't know if Ian's going to speak about that at some point. And then, of course, we are leading the effort to encourage Denverites to recycle and compost more than we already do. And this picture here is actually of a giveaway that we did for reusable bags. As far as we can tell, the bag fee implementation is going really well. We know that a lot of our residents are choosing to start bringing their own bags, and they're using fewer bags. The revenue from that program is only just beginning to come in, so we're not quite sure how much it'll collect in a year, but all those dollars we are able to put to education and outreach and to actual programs that help reduce litter in our communities. And now public health. So public health doesn't always get a lot of attention when it comes to climate change, but of course it is a huge issue, especially in particular communities in our city. So as I mentioned earlier, the public health focus for the city is really housed in that environmental quality division within the Department of Public Health. And so much of the value of their work is really about how they represent us and what they, the advocacy that they give to for the city in front of these different regulatory agencies. We do also have the Healthy Food Program, the Office of Children Affairs, that's OCA, they have a summer meals program. Both of these programs aim to source at least 20% of their food from local suppliers, so actual local growers. And so that's something that has been new that they've been working on in the last few years. And at CASR, we anticipate that a lot of the community facing work that we'll do in this coming year will focus on public health issues under the allowable use categories of climate and environmental justice, as well as adaptation and resiliency. And I'm sorry, I kind of hinted at advocacy. I call this an intangible. That's why there's no dollar value here. But we have a very robust city attorney's office who provides us with tremendous support when we have filings before the Public Utilities Commission, that's the PUC. I mentioned already the Air Quality Control Commission, the Regional Air Quality Council. There's also rules and regulations that the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, comes out with that has major influences in Denver. So City and County of Denver staff are always representing you before these different bodies. And again, I can't really put a dollar value to what that means, but it's a really important role for the city. And so finally, this is where we say the total investment of all the agencies citywide that we can say are benefiting, have some climate and sustainability benefit. And then we obviously break it down like all the different slides that I just showed you. A lot of it is in energy efficiency, renewables, and in natural resources. And that brings us to the next Q&A.
Thank you again. There's so many different things coming up in the chat. It's a little hard to figure out which ones are the best ones to look at right now. I think I'm going to save the ones on composting and all until we have our later discussion. But Loretta had put in here that bike lanes are incredibly slow in coming. Can you please include PSAs so that people understand that they should not park in bike lanes, turn on red lights when bikes have the green, and not to put trash and compost in the bike lanes? I wish the city had the opportunity to do PSAs on many kinds of things, because I think, those of us who are involved in city issues, we keep seeing things that we wish that more people knew about. So if you have any capacity to do more PSAs, that would be good.
Okay, no, that's a great idea.
Sidewalk access to 37th and Tennyson United States Post Office is narrow, and half a dozen parking spots are often so full. Access for the LD is risky on snowy, icy days like today. I think that's a comment that a lot of us see that I don't know if that's under your jurisdiction or not. I didn't think so, but I agree that it can be an issue.
It's not something that we can control, but especially in a meeting like this, like I don't want anybody here to have to go to 7 different agencies to tell them what needs to be done. So we take these notes and we know the right people to go to, and we will tell them this is a need that's been heard from the community, and we can still report back to you on what their plans are.
That's very generous of you. Thank you very much.
That's our job.
Are there any hands raised? I'm not seeing hands raised. If not, shall we go on to the next segment? Oh, I see Drew. I'm sorry, Drew. Go ahead, Drew.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I want to follow up on Gertie Grant's excellent point about, I don't think it was sufficiently addressed about where the urban forest fits into this. I think the role of trees in sequestering carbon versus the development when we pave over space, trees reduce carbon, they cool the planet, as well as just their value in giving us access to nature and reducing stress in modern life. And I point to the city's own game plan from 2019, where they said that we have a deficit in parks of 1,800 acres just to get to average. And with population growth by the horizon of 2030, we will have a deficit of 3,800 acres. So how are you and the rest of the city agencies integrating, particularly with planning and parks and rec, to address our shortage and deficit of open green space and trees? The voters approved acquisition monies for acquisition of parks. How is that coming? And the one thing I really think is often misunderstood is the role of large parks in cooling the planet. You know, these little pocket parks that are sort of shoehorned in by developers to fulfill their open space requirements aren't cutting it. You know, we have 155 acres at Park Hill that now is threatened to be developed. But my question is, what is the city doing, and what are you doing to increase the amount of open space, increase trees? I know you got your initiative to plant trees, but we should be increasing open space and access to nature in this city. We seem to be going in the other direction. So what are you doing about this?
Okay, thanks, Drew. You got a lot packed into that question, and I don't think I can answer all of it sufficiently today, but I'll try to take the pieces that I can. So I'll start with the tree canopy. We agree with you. Our office agrees with you. We would like to see more trees. So we are doing our part. We're doing what we can through our authority with the Climate Protection Fund and focusing our dollars on increasing the tree canopy on private property, which is not something that any other city agency has ever done, or that I know of that they are legally allowed to do, but we are. So that we're doing. I know that we do have also a regulatory deficit with where the point that you made about development, new development, and any requirements for new trees or tree replacement of the trees that they've taken down. We do have we have corralled a working group with folks from Dottie because they manage street trees, community planning and development because they manage zoning and building codes, and also Parks and Rec because of their authority over trees, and also because they have regulatory authority over some of the permits for new construction. There is no city requirement that developers have to plant new trees or replace trees that they've taken down. That and other landscape requirements are something that this group is working on. But unfortunately, it is a zoning code issue. And as you know, zoning changes do take time, but at least we have all the right people at the table who are working on it. It's already been said in many of Denver's plans, as you mentioned, game plan. It's also in our comprehensive plan. It's in Blueprint Denver that we need to address this issue, but we finally are doing that collaboratively across these different agencies. And we are the facilitator for that group to happen. What I don't think I can answer here for you is this question of open space. We are an advocate for that, but we are not a controller of those decisions in the city. That is community planning and development, and it is parks. It's the two of them mostly. And so again, that is something where we need to collaborate with our colleagues and advocate for the position that you're giving us today.
I think
Okay,
I'm going to
thanks.
call a stop to this Q&A again. We will have more later. We're just trying to keep our agenda on time. Thank you.
All right. And finally, you are done hearing from me. I get to turn this over to Taylor. And so you get to see her sunny face and hear her lovely voice in this next section. And Taylor, I'll drive this for you. So if I don't move the slide fast enough, just tell me when.
Sounds good. So I am Taylor Moellers. I am our Sustainable Neighborhoods Program Manager at the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I just wanted to provide a quick overview of a couple of programs that you guys can get involved in. So the first one is Certifiably Green Denver. So Certifiably Green Denver, we provide free sustainability advising services for Denver's business community. Small businesses, local businesses, your favorite restaurants, shops, all of that. What we do is really take business owners through an assessment to look at how they're doing on energy efficiency, water conservation, resource management, providing alternative transportation options for their workers as well as their customers, and then also just good business management processes. So anything from, swapping out to more efficient lighting, putting some aerators on sinks to reduce water use, looking at how we can get, especially restaurants, composting service for those scraps, or work with them to get, creative on how to actually use those scraps and otherwise, discardable pieces put back into meals, get really creative with that. Make sure that there's, bike parking, if there's a little bike corral where people can safely put their bikes out in front of the coffee shop or whatever type of business it might be. So right now we have about 1,800 businesses enrolled in the program. We have about 150 businesses and events who have gone through the full certification process, meaning that they have tackled something in all of these different areas to reach that certification. As we move into 2022, this program is now under our Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency Office, which has a large focus on equity. So we are being much more proactive about reaching out to minority and women-owned businesses to get them involved. So that is one of our programs. If you guys have any favorite places that don't quite have that green business sticker on them yet, let them know about us. We're happy to help them just increase their sustainability practices and give them some love for doing the right thing. The next program that I wanted to just talk about was, yeah, you can go ahead, Grace. Our rapid assessments. So my colleague Jorge Figueroa came on board at the end of last year. And what we're doing right now is rapid needs assessments in 10 neighborhoods. So these are Denver's Nest neighborhoods. That is our neighborhood equity and stabilization office. So these are the 10 neighborhoods there on the right that are designated, the most vulnerable to gentrification, displacement, some of our more under-resourced communities. So what Jorge is doing right now is really co-creating a process with each of these communities to map out the priority needs, the barriers, and the aspirations of residents, including youth, stakeholders in the neighborhood, to see, what do they really need in the short term. And those conversations and these assessments will really help guide our climate protection fund investments over the next couple of years. And we imagine, there will be neighborhood specific needs, but there will also be insights that we learn that can be applicable across neighborhoods and to neighborhoods beyond this list right here. I also wanted to mention, and I'll pop it into the chat once I'm done talking, but we are working right now in Sun Valley. So I believe we've had one meeting so far, and next week we start meeting with residents. But we are looking for nonprofit partners to help us co-create those assessments in those other 9 neighborhoods. So I'll drop the link in the chat for more info on that. And then there's also Jorge's email there to learn more if you want to get involved in the Sun Valley assessment that's happening right now, or if you're in another one of the neighborhoods that's coming up. And then lastly, I'll move to my baby, which is Sustainable Neighborhoods. So Sustainable Neighborhoods is a certification program for Denver neighborhoods. They apply to join the program, and then they really work on projects of their choice. So our tagline for the program is your neighborhood, your ideas, your home. It's really, giving some power back to the neighborhood and giving a platform for residents to let us know, what are the projects that are most important to advancing their sustainability goals in that neighborhood. We have lots of ideas and resources and programs that we can link to in the city, but really we want to hear from neighbors what is most important. So neighbors work on different events, workshops, projects throughout the year, and then receive credits towards their certification, and then receive recognition for achieving those certification requirements. This program, there's a handful of you guys on the call who I know are in some of our sustainable neighborhoods. We've got about 18 of Denver's 78 neighborhoods in the program. It's been a little quiet over the past couple of years, but we are ramping back up in 2022, getting us together online, and hopefully, maybe in the summertime, back together working on projects. And then I think I have one more slide. Just to summarize, we're at the INC meeting right now, so most likely you guys are pretty involved in your neighborhood. But if you don't know your neighborhood organization, we've got a full list at that denvergov.org/RNO. It's always great to just get involved with your registered neighborhood organization to find out what's going on. A lot of our RNOs have sustainability committees and green teams, whether they are officially part of Sustainable Neighborhoods or not. I mentioned our Certifiably Green Denver program. So if you guys have any local businesses, if you're a local business owner, or like I said, you've got that favorite gym or coffee shop or restaurant who you'd like to see, increase their sustainability practices, let us know. We're happy to help them. I will go ahead and drop the rapid assessment information, but please do get involved. If your neighborhood is one on that list of 10, and then in the future, we hope to expand that out even further. And just a friendly reminder, in Denver, we are bringing our own bags to all stores. So that started this summer. And like Grace mentioned, has been going pretty well. So just a friendly reminder to put those back in your car or bike sack or however you get to the grocery store. And then also wanted to mention this year, we have the Skip the Stuff program, which is a new requirement that restaurants do not offer. They only offer single-use items like straws and plastic utensils by request. So just another effort for us to really reduce waste. And I think we'll pause for questions here, and then we'll talk about some more waste stuff in a minute.
Great, thanks, Taylor. A couple of questions that popped up in the chat were about business recycling and promoting business recycling and composting, both in neighborhoods and at bigger municipal or event centers and things like that, like the Mission Ballroom and restaurants around Denver. What's CASR doing to kind of promote these besides just businesses volunteering or opting in?
Yeah, so we have done a few different pilots through the Certifiably Green Denver program where we can cover or partially cover some composting. We've done some restaurant pilots and food waste challenges around that. Right now, as things stand, the city and county of Denver does not have authority to require businesses and multifamily to recycle or compost. We will be talking about a proposal next that applies to Denver's customers, which are single family homes in homes with units 7 and fewer. I do know when I have been chatting with Jane and Perry about this meeting. That question came up around commercial and multifamily. And I don't know if Ian's still on, and don't want to throw him on the spot, but I know he's been working on a Waste No More initiative on the community side of things. So, which would address some of the business and multifamily pieces of it.
All right, thanks. What's CASR doing to promote green roofs?
We do have our green building ordinance, which came out of the Green Roofs Initiative, which was another community-led initiative through the Resilient Denver group. So some of the folks on the call. So thanks. You know, we really need the community to keep letting us know what is important to them. That has the Green Roofs Initiative became the sorry, I am blanking on the term, our roof ordinance, which has options around green roofs, but also cool roofs, energy efficiency measures, some offsets, a bunch of different ways for buildings to meet compliance, but green roofs are still a portion or an option under that ordinance.
Great, thanks. Can you be clear about how a neighborhood gets involved in the Sustainable Neighborhood Certification? Specifically, what are the criteria for certifications?
Yeah, so it has been a few years since we have had an open application, but we are hoping to expand that program in the next year or so. You can reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat to talk more about sustainable neighborhoods. Always happy to meet with folks or to come to neighborhood meetings. But really the certification comes around neighborhoods work on, you know, they host workshops. So, you know, maybe recycling, composting is really important to the neighborhood. And so we bring some speakers together and invite folks over to learn more about that. And then you would earn credits for gathering those neighbors to learn about a particular topic. So it's really what the neighborhood makes it and what's important. There's so many different aspects to sustainability, so you can really work on a lot of different projects.
Great, thanks so much. I think that, you know, a lot of these other questions I'm seeing are kind of about what I believe our next topic is going to be, which is waste and recycling and composting. So why don't we move on to that? And just as a little bit of a tee up here, again, if you're interested in finding out more about any of these issues, please throw your comment or throw your email address in the chat. And we're making a list of everybody that's interested in getting more information from the Climate and Sustainability Group moving forward. And we're also going to put a quick survey in the chat during this discussion, just to get some feedback from folks about this upcoming city initiative. And we're going to be sending this out also to RNOs and other city leaders after this to get some information, just see how folks are feeling about what is coming up with waste and switching with recycling and composting. So with that, I think kind of like to turn this over to Winna. Is she here?
Yes, good job. You got it.
Thanks.
This is Winna MacLaren. I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement for the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I apologize, my computer just works better when I turn my camera off while we're running a presentation. So I will hop off and then hop back on when we get time for Q&A. So we're almost to the end here. Thanks for hanging in there on a Saturday morning and having us here today. We are here to talk trash. So my colleagues and I have been meeting with folks across Denver to share this proposal that would expand our waste hauling services and would also begin charging a fee. So we would like to share this proposal with you and then of course get your feedback. Next slide, please. So I just want to clarify today that we will be talking about Denver's current customers Taylor alluded to this. We serve about 180,000 customers, which includes our single family homes and smaller apartment buildings of up to 7 units. Today's proposal is targeted just towards those customers. Our current waste hauling services are paid for primarily from sales and property taxes, all that goes into the general fund, in addition to visitors that are also paying into the general fund as well. We do not currently have a charge for weekly trash pickup. We don't have a charge for every other week recycling. We do have a charge just under $10 a month for weekly composting. Right now, about 74% of our waste goes straight to the landfill. And so our combined recycling and composting rate, also known as a diversion rate, is at 26%, well below the national average of 34%. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen diversion grow maybe 1 or 2% per year. And with the goal of us getting to a 50% diversion rate or more, it would take us another 25 years to get there. Next slide, please. So from the climate perspective, when we send things to the landfill, those emissions that come out of it matter. So methane is a really potent greenhouse gas emission, and that is created when waste rots in the landfill and actually does a lot more damage to our atmosphere than carbon. But the good news is it leaves the atmosphere much more quickly. So if we can reduce or eliminate all sources of methane as quickly as possible, it'll make a noticeable improvement in our lifetime. So some numbers, if we were to double the amount that we can recycle and compost, we could cut the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from our landfills in half. And then, of course, we want to remember who we're doing this work for. So poor air quality is an issue here in Denver, and the negative impacts of climate change, including extreme heat, hurt the people in the places that we love so much. Our climate efforts are always centered on equity, and we know that our Latino populations, Black communities in Denver, lower income households, our children, these folks are often on the front lines of climate change. And so we want to take it seriously and doing more and doing what it takes to improve our environment so that we can all enjoy a higher quality of life. So you'll see the blue sections on the map. This indicates where the communities tend to have lower access to healthcare, lower access to healthy foods, less access to parks, green spaces, higher rates of poverty, and then of course, increased vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this kind of shows a timeline, the history of discussions, if you will, about beginning to charge this fee, or really beginning to tackle how we can increase our diversion rate in Denver. So most folks in Denver in the early 90s, when we introduced recycling, took it up. We are now at 96% of our customers have recycling carts, which has been really great. About 10 years ago, we started offering composting, and that proved to be really popular. So we have about 30,000 customers right now that are using our compost services, or about 20% of those 180,000 customers I mentioned to you earlier. But not much has changed in the last 10 years. And we frequently hear from our resident-led advisory council, folks in the communities, all recommending to us that we move to a fee-based system to reduce waste, to increase our recycling, and then of course to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. And so that recommendation is based on success that we've seen in other cities that are also charging a fee. So you'll see across the nation, there are cities with 2 or 3 times the rate of recycling and composting or diversion than Denver. Excuse me. These cities all have one thing in common, and that is charging for waste hauling services. So as I mentioned before, our goal is to get to 50% or more. And given the success of these other cities around the nation, we're confident we can get there with this proposal. Next slide. So what is the proposal? So that's where we are right now. And then I'd like to chat with you a bit about how we hope to get there. So if we are able to move to a fee-based service, I just want to say it's important to know that by state law, that fee can only cover what it costs the city to operate those services. So this list shows what all would be included in that cost of services, everything that we would be able to offer in addition to two pretty big changes, which would be composting for all customers. And the one that I think most folks are excited about, myself included, would be moving to weekly recycling. A lot of these other services, special services you might be familiar with, but those would continue, especially with some of our more seasonal or holiday programs as well. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a preview of the pricing structure that we've come up with. So based on your trash cart size, that would determine the fee that you would pay. So customers can mix and match different cart sizes for their trash, recycling, and compost, but one fee would be charged to the size of the trash bin you select. The small cart is 35 gallons for 9, the medium cart 65 gallons for 13, and then the large cart at 95 gallons for 21. The system is set up such that we would be encouraging folks to choose the smallest cart size and be able to reach out and do education as far as what is recyclable and compostable to increase folks that do recycle and compost. Next slide. So this is what it might look like in real life at your house. So these are sample images of actual carts and the space they take up, in addition to the costs. Again, you can see you can have a large recycling, a small compost. You could have different sizes of each, but again, that fee would only be tied to the size of the trash bin you select. Next slide. So we do know that a fee can be tough, especially for a lower income and neighbors that are on fixed incomes. So we do want to include in this proposal, an affordability component to it, which would be an instant rebate for those that would qualify. Eligibility for that rebate would be based on income and household size. That's where you're seeing what the area median income table here refers to. And then we would automatically apply that rebate to the bill. So it'd be convenient for customers. They don't have to take any extra steps once they initially apply and qualify for the rebate. Next slide. I think it's really important to compare what these proposed rates are to what we're seeing regionally. These rates that we're proposing would be the lowest in the region. And this table actually shows the real life costs that people pay in other cities to have to hire a trash company to haul their waste. And from what we know, only a few of those cities include composting in addition to the fee. And I think it's also important to note that we do not know of any other cities or haulers that offer a discount program for low-income households, which this program would include. Next slide. So if all were to go as planned, this is a tentative timeline of what we're looking at. Excuse me. If City Council were to vote to approve an ordinance, we would hope to have a program up and running by this fall, hopefully by October. And our first order of business would be to expand weekly recycling. We've heard loud and clear that people want that and they're excited about that. And then phase in composting for all customers as we're able. As you know, COVID has caused global supply chains across the board, and trucks are a part of that market that are impacted as well. But we would be working as quickly as possible to get all the trucks we need for full implementation as quickly as possible. And with that, we will open it up for Q&A. I'll get my video back up.
Thank you, Winna. That was really informative. And I think the thing that makes me feel a whole lot better about this is that people with large families, I want to make sure that they feel like they can put their trash in the trash and also have space to learn how to recycle and compost. So I think this is very helpful to me, especially to know that we're a two-person household and we don't have much trash, but I know large families, they go through a lot of things. So I'm really happy to have this as a part of your program. Do I see a hand raised? Harmony?
Hi. I was curious about contamination because if compost is free, what prevents someone from putting their trash in the compost?
Thanks, Harmony. That's a really great question and one that we hear a lot. I do have a friend of mine here from the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. Part of rolling out this proposal will include more folks out there to make sure that contamination is not happening. And of course, we do want to make sure that we're leading with education and awareness as far as what you can compost, what you can recycle, and getting folks used to this new shift and this new change. But as far as deliberate contamination, I know that is something that Dottie has currently and has dealt with before. So Jessica, if you want to chime in on how we're going to get more resources out there.
Thanks, Winna. I mean, you pretty much said it. We're ramping up on our inspectors that'll be out there in the field. We also will be capable of finding people for contamination. At first, we're not going to lean on that. We're definitely going to make sure that education is provided. It's our priority. So first education, then fees. Inspectors will be involved. And we also plan on doing some audits of our routes to see if the compost is contaminated in certain neighborhoods based on our feedback from our drivers and from residents. So we'll be able to provide that targeted neighborhood education as well, based on what we're seeing from our truckloads.
Keith, do you see something in the chat we should look at?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a common question. So can you kind of set up the differentiation between single family households and larger apartment buildings, and what would apply and what wouldn't apply, and if apartment buildings aren't going to be covered and whatnot?
Yeah, so this proposal would strictly for those that are in single family households or smaller apartment units, smaller apartment buildings, which we define as 7 or fewer units. And those are the only customers that the city and county of Denver currently services for waste hauling. And that's what this would target. As far as larger apartment buildings and businesses, they all have to actually pay for private haulers for their trash, and if they choose, recycling and composting.
I see Gertie's had her hand up for a while. Gertie, what's your question? Unmute yourself.
My suggestion is that some PSAs be developed that RNOs can put in their newsletters, but also individuals like me can go when I am walking in the neighborhood and I pick up an aluminum can that somebody's dropped either carelessly or whatever out their car window, I will put it in the closest recycling bin I can find. And when I open the recycling bin, I find stuff in there that is in a plastic bag. And it would be really, and I am not beyond emptying the plastic bag into the recycling bin and putting the plastic bag in the trash bin. I would feel a lot better if I had some kind of little note in my pocket that I could take out with some Scotch tape and tape to the inside lid of those bins to remind people, please do not put plastic bags into the recycling. And also, I've been known to go into trash cans and open up the trash and look when I see cans or bottles that are obviously recyclable, doing the reverse. And I think it would make me reduce my frustration with the public habits, ignorance, whatever. If I could be part of that education process myself. So I'm urging you to do PSAs that we as citizens can use, so we're not writing terrible things to people and putting them in their, taping them to their trash cans. Thank you.
I think you can all see why Gertie got one of our special recognitions as a neighborhood activist last year. So keep it up. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you. I think you might have yourself a pretty good inspector, Jessica, to add to your list. Yeah, education is going to be very important. And we know that. We actually have launched our education working group in the hopes that this ordinance will pass, because we know it's going to be critically important that in order to reach our diversion goals and to really help everyone along with this change, we're going to have to up our education outreach efforts. So that's going to be a big charge of ours. And we welcome more ideas as far as how we can get out there in the community, working with these groups like you all to make sure people know. That would be helpful as we kind of start ramping up efforts.
Kind of echoing that, Trupti wrote in the chat that she visited several facilities pre-pandemic and learned a lot more about trash that way than most of the flyers and educational materials. Like one option would be, if everybody can't visit a facility, to make a video that Inc. could share about what goes on at those facilities for us to get out.
Sorry, are you asking about sharing what goes on at our waste facilities?
Yeah. I'll jump in. This is Tripti. Pre-pandemic, there was a bus tour, kind of a full day. You went to the compost, the recycling, and our landfills. And obviously compost, what I learned most was the gaps in my own knowledge on the recycling side. And I'm someone who pays attention to this. My husband's from Boulder, and he also, I call him like a czar in the house. He goes behind me and, corrects me all the time. But I learned things. And then some of those were things I've never seen in the flyers. For instance, and this one is a big one, and I've started seeing some change. And like Gertie, I kind of do this myself by educating people. But the fact that there's a plastic wrapper on an aluminum beer can, which is happening with all the breweries, especially the ones who do it themselves, because they can't afford the printed ones, right? Because they don't have that kind of volume. Those are being tossed in recycling, but because the outer layer is plastic, all of that is wasted. Businesses don't know this, the employees don't know this, and people don't know it. What I do see now is, they're perforated. Sometimes they have a label. Some of the responsible, larger breweries are doing this, but I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go there. Another one was the size of containers. For instance, a bottle cap. If I had just a bottle cap, it should go in the garbage because it's too small and will mess up the machines. But if you empty it and put the cap back on the bottle, you're good. There was a few things like that were illuminating. And then what I went back, and every time I see a PSA, I wish you'd have a PSA that looked at the biggest, the things that people just don't know of, rather than the things that people do, like plastic bags don't go in the garbage or recycling. While I know that's a big issue, but for folks who are conscious, and we do know that, it would be the things that are not apparent that I wish you guys would focus PSA on. That's one. Second one, focus on the kids and put them in charge of monitoring their parents, because at this point, I'd give up on, not you, Gertie, but I'd give up on, some of the older folks. But the way we're going to make a difference is by putting the kids in charge of, this kind of stuff. Maybe make a contest. I don't know. Get the kids involved in going and checking after their parents for all of that kind of stuff. And then last, what's the cost benefit analysis on if you made all of these things free, the garbage, the whatever, to disincentivize people putting it in the wrong place because they don't want to pay, versus hiring inspectors and writing fees. I assume somebody's done a cost benefit on making all these things free, and there's got to be money somewhere for this. So maybe the last question is the only real question. The other two are suggestions.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know about the cost benefit analysis as far as what it would take if we were to make all of these free. Jessica, do you have any background data on that? Or Grace, sorry.
I was going to ask Grace about that one.
Sure. If I understand correctly, because I have to say, I was typing in the chat at the very last part of your question, Tripti. But I think what you asked is, why aren't we just doing all this for free?
well, at least an analysis of, why we can't do it for free.
Sure. No, we actually do have, we are required by law to have a cost of service study in order to determine what the rates are. Because as Winna said at the beginning of the presentation, by state law under Tabor, a service fee is only allowed to cover the cost of the service that for which it's being charged. The city certainly could make the decision to expand to weekly recycling and give all customers composting at no additional charge. However, the service is currently paid for by the general fund. So if let's just say for sake of argument that it's a 50% increase in cost, that is more money that needs to come from the general fund that is only providing a service to our customers, but it is being paid for by all residents and all businesses, many of whom are not our customers. So that is simply a budget decision that the mayor and the city council would need to collaborate on to choose to use the general fund in that way. And the reason we have this proposal that we'll be taking to city council in the coming weeks is because we do not believe, we the city administration do not believe that is the best use of additional general fund dollars.
And just to add quickly to that, the goal of this program is to increase recycling and composting. And so if we just make it free, it's not going to create, that sort of motivation, right, to have a smaller fee and reduce how much you're actually sending to landfill. So if folks want a smaller fee, they choose the smaller trash can, and hopefully we can get more recycling and composting.
Thank you.
I see Miles has had his hand up for a long time. Miles, what's your question?
Yeah, just more of a follow-up on what Trupti just asked. If you were required to do a fee analysis, I'd like to better understand if you can disclose some of those numbers to understand what is the current cost of the services, and then rolling out this fee. Is it a balance? Is it a wash? Or is the city going to get some type of a surplus based on this, and then where that money might be going? It's just because, again, the fees have been built into the taxes, so we have been paying them, and so this is a new fee and here's another question. So in the future, if the city decides to raise this fee, what are the controls for that? Could it just go up every month? Or every year? And how do we know more of that general fund money that would normally go to the city starts being absorbed by these fees and used for something else?
Sure, I can take at least a few parts of that. So for the controls, that is all being drafted in the actual ordinance that will be presented to council. And so I don't think I have a concrete answer for you, other than to say that the ordinance and the rules and regulations that go along with it, which have to be approved by council, will spell out how and when the city is allowed to change the rates and under what circumstances. So again, I can't answer that right now, but I do know that will be in the public or in the ordinance, which will be issued publicly before it is voted on by council. So that's one part of your question. Excess revenue. A service fee like this is not permitted by state law, by Tabor, to generate more than, I believe it's 8% of the actual cost of the service based on the prior year's cost to run the service. So it is an estimate right now in terms of what we think it will cost to implement the program and the revenue, because we are not 100% sure exactly how many of our customers will choose the large cart, the medium cart, and the small cart. The cost to perform the service doesn't really change based on their cart size, but the amount of revenue that service fee that the service fee brings in, that does change by those cart sizes. So I know you and someone else asked in the chat if we can provide the cost of service study to the public. I don't think I can. I don't have it myself. It's not mine. Dottie, Jessica's department is working on that. So I think that's the type of documentation that may come out when the ordinance is actually presented to council. So I would say stay tuned. And as soon as we have more information on that, we can certainly provide it to Inc.
Thank you.
Okay, I just think that that's important in rolling out a new fee, that it's very clear and we all understand, because also there's going to be some fees for all the carts too. So that's going to be a huge impact of purchasing all of these things. So thank you.
Jessica got good news yesterday about the carts, didn't you, Jessica? Are you allowed to say anything?
Yeah. So we were awarded the Front Range Waste Diversion Grant on Wednesday for many compost carts to help fund. We need to buy about 150,000 compost carts to provide to the remaining households that don't have that service right now. So that was a big win for us, and I'm super excited about it.
Adrian just raised his hand. What's your question, Adrian?
No, I was just applauding the getting the
Oh,
cart grant.
okay.
Yeah.
Guess
The
I
city
didn't know
doesn't
that.
get enough applause, and I'm happy to provide it.
I love it. That's great. Keith, is there something in the chat we should bring up?
I would just echo what Miles was saying in terms of really, because I've heard this presentation now, this is the second time, and I think emphasizing that the mandate that the city is mandated not to collect more is really meaningful. And it seems like that, I know the presentation I heard before, a lot of people had concerns about this being some kind of slush fund that gets created. And so pointing that out is really good. And I think Trupti kind of echoes that as well, just with a comment that said, need more transparency on the sausage making in general. So anything there would be helpful. I think there's been several questions in the chat about what's going to happen with people's existing bins and how that transition is going to take place. Do they just keep their existing bins, whatnot?
Well, for the majority of residents, they're going to be getting compost carts for the first time. So I think that we definitely want residents to, get their compost cart, see how their trash is significantly reduced, and then request a smaller trash cart size, and we'll happily exchange them. And if you want to do that prior to the start of invoicing, then great, because you already have a compost cart and you know that your trash, that you don't have that much trash and you want a small cart. So basically at any point, residents will be able to go online, call 311, request a smaller trash cart size.
So there was a question really early in the meeting that we didn't get to, Grace, and I'm going to forward this on to you. Someone asked about the SAC committees and how people are appointed and if there's possibility to get on a waiting list.
Sure. No, great question. So the SAC was first, the new reconfiguration of the SAC. We had applications open to the public in December of 2020, in January of 2021. The selections were made and people were appointed in April of 21. We are now getting ready to issue our new application for the coming year. Everyone's terms are 2 years, but of course, with 120 people, we've had some attrition, right? People have moved, people have directed their civic energies elsewhere. So we will have more seats available for the coming year. And so I hope to have that application out by mid to end of March for sure. And so Inc., you are already on our email list. You will definitely get a notification of the application, and we certainly hope you will share it with everybody.
Thank you. Again, thanks. I'm not closing. I just want to reiterate a thank you to all of the city staff members that have been here on a Saturday morning. And I'm letting you all know that Inc. is providing a special service this morning with this lengthy meeting, so you're prepared to watch the Super Bowl tomorrow. Keith, do you have another question?
I'm just looking through some of these chat questions here. There's a question on with this, what happens if someone can't pay their fees?
So part of the presentation included the instant rebate program that will be available for residents. So that rebate can be based on your income and the number of people in your household. It ranges from 50% basically discounted invoice up to 100%. So there will be some people that are eligible for 100% off of their invoice. So you're at 60% AMI and you can't afford the 50% amount for 1 more month.
June Churchill has her hand up.
Thanks for calling on me, but a few other people have had their hands up before mine.
But they've already spoken, so I'm going to give you that opportunity.
All right,
Thanks, Jane. I have.
All right, very exciting then. So on the subject of large apartment buildings, also sorry, my sleep schedule, I'm usually nocturnal, so I'm up very, very late. So if I'm a bit incoherent, that's why. So for large apartment buildings, I know those have to get private trash hauling, and I know y'all don't have regulatory oversight over those. However, is there a way you can present recommendations to city council to essentially, mandate that they have to include recycling and composting services with their trash hauling? Or, I mean, I know businesses, apartments, restaurants have different needs, but that is a significant customer. And of course, big areas like, the Western Center, DU, all the college campuses downtown, I think all those could benefit from more composting and recycling, especially in collaboration with the city, if that makes sense. I hope that made sense. I hope the question made sense. Yeah, essentially, can you help the city mandate composting services and recycling services for large apartment buildings in large capacity areas? So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess just to address that briefly, you are correct that if the city, in order to require large apartment buildings and the business community to recycle or compost would require a city ordinance. We do not have one drafted at this time, but I do know that there is a pending ballot initiative this fall that might ask the Denver voters to do the same.
Lucia, you have your hand up?
Yes. Thank you. First of all, this has been a fabulous presentation, and I appreciate INC putting this on. Great job, everybody. I just wanted to echo some other things. INC as a body, in my opinion, should be helping push their council and mayor to more quickly eliminate single unit zoning throughout the city as an issue of greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, the city can only build multi-units in 20% of the city, or developers can only build in 20% of the city if they want to build multi-unit. 80% of the city is zoned single unit. So that we're also in a housing crisis, so we don't want to have sprawl, but we've got to allow, duplexes, triplexes, even fourplexes. I'm not talking about massive apartment buildings, but even just more gentle density like that in all parts of the city. And I think that INC as a body could help push the city in that direction, especially in the name of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Miles, you have your hand up?
I think Loretta was before me.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Loretta, go ahead.
All right. So basically, I had one question from Ian, and I think he had to drop off, and I don't think anybody ever answered it. But can you talk about current climate funding level versus what Denver Climate Plan calls for? Additionally, I had a comment about, I don't know that you guys talked about home composting, and I don't know why we don't talk about that and training people for doing their own home composting. I've been doing it for more than 25 years, and it's not that difficult. And, I've done it in a climate that's wet, and you get turned compost in a month. And Colorado, you get it in 3 months or 4. But I think, you know, using it for your yard, certainly, and composting cuts down so many other issues that you're using a cart that's going to clog the alley, you're doing all these other things. But if you have the space, if you can do it, you know, home composting is great. And worms, you know, red worms, wigglers are great. So there's a lot of other options out there. So again, Ian's question too, to talk about current climate funding level versus what the Denver climate plan calls for.
Okay, I hear 2 questions there, and I think I can address one. Taylor, I might be tapping you for the home composting one. I think the climate plan you're talking about is probably the report of the Climate Action Task Force, which had a very large recommendation for funding. It essentially said that I think by 2030, Denver would really need to invest about $3 billion in all the actions recommended in that report. And we certainly are not at that level of funding. But I will say that, again, since this agency became an agency, our budget has grown by a factor of 10, and our staff has almost tripled. So, and I can tell you, as a sustainability professional who's been in this field for over 20 years, and I've worked with multiple cities, there's no other city of this size that has this level of dedicated funding and staffing to this issue. So while we are not at the levels recommended by the Climate Action Task Force, we are far and away better positioned than many other cities, including other cities larger than Denver that presumably would have more money available just due to their size. So I think we're thanks to the Denver voters, we're in a really fantastic position for our work. And I was going to tap Taylor on the composting question only because I don't think we have any of our folks from our resource management group here today. We do have a contract with Denver Urban Gardens to conduct master composter training for our residents. And I'm sorry, Taylor, I don't know if you know more about the program details than I do.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly where we stand in 2022, but as Grace mentioned, we do work with Denver Urban Gardens to host the Denver Master Composter training. I've been through it. I think I recognize a couple names on the call too who have been through it. But we work with them. We have Denver Urban Gardens has a compost demonstration site at the Gove Gardens. That's at 13th and Colorado Boulevard, where they host several classes a month in the spring, summer, and fall to teach people how to compost at home, whether it's, you know, a bin system where you're turning, a tumbler where you can like mechanically turn, or even worm bins that you can keep in your home. So different options for different situations that you're in. So we definitely still do promote people to compost at home. You know, folks who are interested in that, you know, people who are really big gardeners, have lots of leaves and all that fun stuff. You can keep it right in your backyard and, you know, turn those materials into composting that you can put right back into your garden. So I would say, you know, that is, if that is something you're passionate about and have materials through gardening, that is probably your best option. I will mention though that the compost collection service that the city provides does collect some more things that are not always appropriate for backyard composting. So like meats and bones and dairy and some of those things that you want to keep out of your backyard pile. So we do have people who like to do both. So they'll compost in their backyard for some materials. Some of those other materials they'll use their green bin for, and it ends up being a nice balance to get all of the materials that you have at your household composted in one way or another. And then
you just like pushed for being vegan. And that's why I don't eat any meat or have any dairy or have anything that won't go in the compost.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I mean, lifestyle changes like that are great too. Obviously that's personal decisions, but the more we learn about the reasons for eating less meat or no meat at all, you know, that can help environmentally. The one other piece I was going to mention on compost. So we do have our compost from the green bins goes out to A1 Organics out in Keensburg, Colorado. We do get that material back in the form of Denver's own EcoGrow, which is bagged compost sold at local Ace Hardware stores in Denver. If you guys have seen that, we do have an annual mulch giveaway and then discounted compost sale, usually in May. And then, if this new waste services proposal were to move forward, I know Dottie is having conversations with A1 about how to get more of that compost back into the city, either discounted or free as well. So just some more things to look forward if this proposal does move forward.
Okay. Trupti's had her hand up, or is it Miles? I don't remember who had their hand up first.
Yeah, I was up first. So just a follow-up question, and I know this is more of a general question of the issues we've been having. I live in Congress Park, and solid waste just moved our trash to the front street, to the main street, as opposed to the alley. My concern now is I live on a street that's heavily parked. So right now I'm required to put out the recycling as well as the trash. And then now we're talking about a new possible compost bin, and I don't have space right now. And then so the next question on top of that is, as I've got neighbors building accessory dwelling units, so now that's even more bins on the street. So how is that going to be addressed? Because again, if we have more multifamily housing, that's more bins on the street. And in where I live, it's a critical issue, and there is no space. So I don't know how that will be addressed, but I think it needs to be looked at.
Yeah, we get this concern a lot. Obviously, adding more carts raises concern for congestion in alleys and in the streets. And I'm familiar with the Congress Park set out situation. We're definitely encouraging residents to share compost carts, especially those multifamily buildings that don't have yards. I know a lot of them do it today. And so solid waste redistricted and now has new routes that they cover throughout the city. And what they did is that they made the districts smaller, and they assigned a supervisor to each district. And so with this new model, we're hoping that those district supervisors and superintendents can actually work more intimately with those neighborhoods and familiarize themselves with their specific, unique set out concerns or, layouts. And we're definitely willing to work with everyone and customize as needed, because we know that delivering a bunch of new cards around the city is going to be a lot for that.
Well, if anything, we did have a discussion with the director of solid waste. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that Dottie needs to be involved in this. There needs to be, if you're going to require this in the front, there needs to be zones maybe for trash pickup. There needs to be coordination with curbside management and how you expand or contract that in the future. I mean, this is a logistical thing and needs to be worked out. Maybe there's no parking zones for those pickup days, but it needs to be really thought out.
Yeah, and if you spoke to Art himself, then that's the boss. So that was the most direct way to get that point across. So I'm glad you got the chance to speak with him about that.
I don't think anything's going to be done, so I don't know how we bring pressure.
It's not only your concern, it's also ours. We share that.
Okay, we're down to our last 5 minutes of questions. We've tried to make sure this time, because last year when we had this presentation, we learned that we did not give enough time for questions and answers. So if you want to raise your hand, we can probably take a couple more. And then again, thanks to all of the city staff members who've been so eager to join us today and so informative. And I know they're happy to work with neighborhoods because that's what their goal is to make the climate better in Denver for all of us. I see Harmony, you have your hand up.
Hi. Something that is a concern to me in the city is that there's often not a place for me to throw out trash or go to the bathroom. And I know that's not what we're here for across the city, but I think about our unhoused neighbors. And we can keep pretending that this is a problem that doesn't exist, but they need trash service too. And I know I've brought this up in prior meetings, but just curious if there's any dialogue about how we provide trash for all residents of Denver, not just those in homes.
Hi, Harmony. Thanks for the question. And yes, we have heard that question before. That is not anything that we're able to address today. I think that's really a question for the city attorney's office. So we could, but because you've got it in the chat, and I've committed that we're going to answer all the questions in the chat within a week. So I will make sure that we tap their staff to get an answer to that question.
All right, we'll take one last question from Gertie.
I would think having RTD put trash receptacles and possibly recycling receptacles at
Right.
bus stops would be a big help, partly because people go to Safeway or whatever and then get on and wait at the bus stop and have trash and recycling that goes, guess where? On the ground around the bus stops. And I think it would also possibly be places where people who are unhoused could also put their trash. Thank you.
Well, it's not 11:25, so Van, I'll take your question.
Thank you. I came into the meeting a little late. I just had a question about sort of outreach plan for some of the neighborhoods that don't have a lot of composting participation. So specifically in Globeville, the composting rates are pretty low. So I'm curious what kind of education and outreach planning CASR has sort of cooking up.
I'm sorry, Van, I want to make sure I got the question right. You're asking about how much outreach are we going to be doing into communities that currently have a lower rate of, say, participation in the composting program?
Exactly. Yep.
Well, I think, and Jessica alluded to this earlier, we know that if this proposal is adopted by city council, that literally within hours, we need to start the education push, right? Everything about this is going to need a lot of education. I mean, it's a huge change for our customers to have an account and have to, choose their cart size and we're already telling them how to recycle properly and it doesn't work everywhere, right? We're going to have to do the same thing for composting. So we have a team ready to go that's working on that next phase of the outreach. And that will have to be ongoing. It's not the kind of education that we do it for a few months and then once the program runs, we stop. It is constant. It is constant reminders and constantly finding new ways of communicating with people that resonate with different audiences.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time for this segment. I don't know if Grace or Taylor or any of you want to do a closing comment, and then we'll turn it back to Loretta.
Just thank you for having us.
You've really helped us out a lot this morning. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
It's 11:20.